As the sunlight fades into autumn gloom, the rustling of leaves in the cool, dim air gives proof of the coming season. Overhead, the insidious cackle of witches flying pierce the darkness. Horrid figures of silent phantoms stalk desolate paths and candle-lit hallways. And all manner of things, goblins, banshees, and vampires, hide amongst the growing shadows. Thus begins October. Blackwater Media presents Halloween Horrors. A young bachelor at the beginning of his career became very successful very quickly, so he bought himself a house. One morning he awoke to the sound of running water. He rushed to the bathroom and saw that the bathtub faucet was running on full blast. He was perturbed by this as he lived alone. A week later, it happened again. Only this time it wasn't just one faucet. It was all of the faucets in the house. The young man called a repairman to fix the pipes and the water damage. But as it turned out, the pipes weren't broken. The repairman, who was a local guy, seemed visibly shaken. "What's wrong?" the bachelor asked. "The woman who lived here before you," said the repairman. "She drowned in that bathtub." I moved from Texas to Georgia about 5 years ago when I got married. A few weeks after I moved and was feeling a little bit more settled, I had a strange but I felt beautiful experience. I was asleep and was woken up by what felt like someone pulling my hand. When I opened my eyes, it was dark, but I could see what appeared to be a child of about 7. She was pulling or gently yanking my hand with her right hand, and with her left hand was pointing to the area near the door past the foot of the bed, which I could see from my side of the bed. The little girl was pointing and saying, "Alice, Alice." When I looked to the area where the child was pointing, I could see what appeared to be an adult woman. Now again, it was dark, but from the body shape and clothing, she looked like a woman. Right away, I thought it could be my grandmother, Alice, visiting me. I didn't feel frightened or get any bad vibes. I was surprised, but was happy to think that this was my grandmother. I pulled my hand back away from the little girl and did not try to interact with either of these entities, because I have heard that negative entities will pretend to be spirits of loved ones. I closed my eyes, prayed, and gave thanks for my wonderful grandmother. You see, I believe that our ancestors watch over us and can visit us. I expressed my love and gratitude for that and for all of my ancestors' love and guidance, and I easily fell back asleep. In the morning, I told my wife what happened, but before I could tell her that I believed it was my grandmother, she said, "Oh, that was my grandmother Alice." And I said, "I thought it was my grandmother Alice." You see, we didn't know that we both had grandmothers named Alice. I finally located him. Or should I say, it. Shit, I don't know anymore. Or if it even matters. Anyway, I followed it. Maybe in some cases, tracked it. Month after month, through more than a dozen small towns scattered up and down 50 highways, rail lines, streams, creeks, abandoned farms, rotted out shacks. Of course, each month the trail would get hot, or at least warm. The deaths always coincided with the full moon. Always. They were always described as mutilations and attributed to wild dogs and the occasional bear or even red wolf. Of course, I knew better. It's part of my job to know. Best to keep this away from the public. Let the media do their work. Speculate, postulate, and then move on. It satisfies the crazies, the religious kooks, the conspiracy monkeys, and the half-literate ass-scratchers that don't know pig shit from pot roast. Nevertheless, it was at a place called Magnolia Hollow, just off Highway 18 near Spartanburg, the fucking middle of nowhere. Real RFD territory. A deserted storage shed with a tin roof. It was barely safe. The creature came crashing out of the shed, snarling with preternatural fury. It had transformed inside. It was wearing the remnants of a bloody ragged shirt and ripped pants. It bore its fangs as it raged, and its ears pointed slightly backwards, as if to accentuate the creature's evil, menacing posture. Then it came at me. In a frozen moment of time, I raised my .44 and aimed. As the silver bullet struck home, the werewolf screamed in pain and terror, a scream which almost obscured the explosive firepower of the Magnum. Then all was silent, save the sound of crickets and a gentle breeze dancing beneath the full moon, which hung low in the October darkness. Lying before me was a dead man, a man whose spirit was now free, and a demon sent back to the abyss. My work was over, at least for the time being. I was exhausted, hungry, and anxious to get home. My satisfaction lay in that I had made the world safer. I beat back, to whatever degree, the forces of evil. I did it simply by doing what I do best. I killed a monster.
After the Lutz family moved into their dream house, they were running for their lives. What happened to them is an experience in terror you will never forget. And you will believe in the Amityville Horror. Rated R.
Now playing at a theater or drive-in near you.
Starting at a new school can always be a challenge. You don't have many friends and you don't really know the lay of the land. And so it was with me. A new school, just a couple of friends. And I told my friends who were with me, who were also new by the way, that I'd just like to go wander around the school for a while. They agreed, and we decided to meet up at our assigned room later. I made my way to another building in the school, and I tipped in, making sure the guard didn't notice me. Yeah, I was a bit of a rule breaker back then. Anyway, I walked up the stairs and decided to roam around the rooms. As I was walking up the stairs, I was having this weird feeling that someone was following me, and I was 100% sure I was alone in the building. I did turn around for just a second in case it was the guard who was following me, but I didn't see anyone, so I continued to walk. I finally ended up on the top floor of the building. The rooms had doors, but one of them had a broken lock, so I snuck in. It was the darkest damn room on that hall, and it was located at the very end. All of the rooms had glass windows on the door so I could see through. And at first I thought I must have been hallucinating because I thought I saw a little girl peeking through the last dark doorway. She had black hair, black eyes, and pale skin. So of course I was intrigued. So I went inside that dark room. You heard me. Now it looked like a storage room inside compared to the other rooms. It was full of boxes and old school stuff. Then one of the boxes fell. I put it back where it was because the guard might suspect that I was in the room. I roamed around for a while looking at the old books and trophies stored there. And something caught my eye. I saw a picture frame on the floor with a glass picture in it. It looked like it was somewhere in the late 50s to early 60s, since the school was where my grandma had gone when she was young. On the corner of the picture, I saw that same little girl that I saw peeking through the door. In the picture, she was wearing a white uniform with black shoes, and she had a very serious look on her face. So I decided to put it back down on the floor, and my skin went pale. There she was, that same little girl standing just a few feet away from me. I couldn't move. Her head was facing down, but she slowly moved it up, and I didn't want to see that face. I'm already scared as hell, starting to sweat, heart racing. I panicked and hauled ass outside the room. I looked back and saw her pass through the walls of the room. Then she floated about 2 feet off the floor, and she reached out her arms trying to catch me. I ran down the goddamn stairs like there was no tomorrow. I stopped at the first floor to catch my breath, and then looked around to see if she was close behind. But there was no one there. I walked fast until I reached the ground floor, and I felt relieved as I saw the building exit sign. Suddenly I heard a laugh, and I turned to my left. And there she was again with her black hair spread, her black bleeding eyes, and her terrifying wide grin. I couldn't take it anymore, so I ran outside the building as fast as I could and walked towards another building where my assigned room was. I entered the room and acted like nothing happened, just sat down next to my friends. I asked one of them if they'd ever heard any weird stories about the school. One of them answered and told me that the building had been haunted when a loner girl once committed suicide in her classroom. And it was the room that I went in. Strange things are also said to happen in that building. And so they built another building, the building that I was assigned to. They wanted to transfer the students out of the haunted area. Now that building is used strictly for storage. No one stays there. Ever since then, I've stayed away from that area too. But from time to time, I still see a little girl peeking from that building's window.
They came from another planet to destroy the Earth. Giant spiders, crushing, clawing, killing, wreaking havoc. There was no place to hide from them. They were everywhere. Could anything stop the giant spider invasion? Beware, the spiders are coming.
You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. A doctor was working at a hospital where the patients were tagged with colored bands, green for alive and red for deceased. One night, the doctor was instructed to get a few supplies from the basement of the hospital, so he headed to the elevator. The elevator doors opened, and there was a patient inside minding her own business. Patients were allowed to roam around the hospital to stretch, especially those who stayed a long time. The rule was to be back in their rooms before 10 o'clock. The doctor smiled at the patient before pressing the number for the basement. He found it unusual that the woman didn't have a button already pressed. He wondered if she was heading to the basement too, but that would be strange. The elevator finally reached a floor where the doors opened. In the distance, a man was limping towards the elevator, and in a panic, the doctor slammed the elevator button to close. It finally did, and the elevator began to ascend back up, the doctor's heart pounding. "Why did you do that?" "He was trying to use the elevator," the woman stated annoyingly. "Did you see his wrist?" the doctor asked. "It was red. He died last night." "I know because I did his surgery." The woman lifted her wrist, and the doctor saw red, and she smiled. "You mean like this one?"
Last time, you'll remember, he got a stake through his vampire's heart. And that would have been the end of Dracula if this bunch of rotten kids hadn't raised him from the grave with their satanic invocations for Dracula AD 1972. And all they get for their trouble is a lot of fangs right in the neck. Welcome back, Drac. Dracula AD 1972. Rated PG.
You know, a lot of crazy shit can happen to you when you do things out of sheer boredom. And that's what happened to me and some of my close friends back in 2010. So check this out. We're all sitting around my house, bored out of our minds, and we got the great idea to go camping. So we packed all of our stuff like flashlights, sleeping bags, food, and so on, and started out on a 3-mile trek. It was still sunny, but I looked at my watch and it was around 8 o'clock. We were halfway there by then, so we were lucky we had a bit of time till dark approached. When we finally arrived at the camping area, there was a little bench for us to sit on and talk and laugh a bit. Anyway, we put up our tents and set up our beds, and although we didn't know it, we weren't going to get any sleep that night. So at around 9:30, we were all settled in, having a good laugh with each other, when all of a sudden we heard a loud bang. It was a bit strange, of course, because we knew there were no houses or roads nearby. We took the public pathway, and that's the only way, and we were freaked out, but we ignored it mostly. An hour later, it was pitch black. The only light was our fire and flashlights. The next thing we heard was a snap, like someone stood on a branch. It was close. We all stayed quiet, and we heard a scream. This wasn't normal. We packed all our shit up and ran fast, but it felt like something was chasing us. We looked behind, and all we saw was this tall thing following us. We were screaming like a bunch of little punks, knowing no one could hear us, but we kept running, and we looked behind, and it was gone. Now, I know from horror films, you don't ever stop running, and so we carried on. Eventually, we came to an open footpath and walked fast, aware of everything around us. But we heard a continuous scream getting closer behind us. We looked, and it was freaky as fuck. It was a man. I dropped everything. I didn't care, and I was not going to come face to face with this, whatever the hell it was. We must have been running for almost an hour when we came to a street about a mile from my house. We saw light and people in their houses, but still didn't feel safe. We started to walk normally and felt everything fade like the fear of that strange thing in the woods. I tell you, that's one night I'll never forget. Never. There was once a family of 4. A mother, Lily, a father, Carl, a son, Randy, and a daughter, Carly. They were a normal family. Randy and Carly went to school and Carl worked at a bank full time while Lily stayed home and did the cooking and cleaning. One day Carl was walking on the street when he came across a man who looked like he was starving. He went up to the man and said, "You look like you need some money." Carl gave the man $20 and started to go. Before he could leave, the man came up to him and said, "You will pay for what you have done, and so will the rest of your family." Carl didn't have a clue what that meant, but as soon as he turned around, the man was gone. When he got home, he noticed his kids weren't home from school yet. He thought Lily must have taken them somewhere. He sat down and turned on his TV. When he saw what was happening, he rushed out the door. When he got to the scene, he looked at the dead bodies of his wife and kids. They had been killed in a car crash. When he looked up, he saw the man from the street, the man that he had given money to. He was about to go over to him, but just then another car swerved and hit him. The next night, their neighbor saw something in their window. He knew that they were all dead, but he was curious to know what was in the house. When he went inside, what he saw made his heart skip a beat. There were 4 rotting bodies dancing in the middle of the room. When they saw him, they stopped dancing and started chanting, "Flesh, flesh, flesh. We must have flesh." Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Lester, and I want to tell you about a new membership opportunity from Blackwater Media. Now yes, you can sign up for the regular Swamp Hunter Society membership at $4.99 a month and have access to the premium content. But you also have the option of getting the Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. That's right, with a one-time payment of just $49.99, you can have the same access to the same premium content, early releases, at a savings of almost $10 off of a regular membership. So if you enjoy the finest in paranormal and cryptid horror, head on over to blackwatermedia.net and get your Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. A hiker decided to go on a hike by himself, something he was not very used to. The whole day seemed normal. Trees and bushes engulfed his surroundings. He enjoyed being outdoors in the mountains. Nothing seemed strange to him. That was until he was making his way back to his car. He figured an 8-hour hike was good enough. The sky was already getting dark, and he needed to get back fast. What was odd was how much he didn't recognize the trail back, and he began to panic. Night had already taken over, and all he had was a flashlight and no clue on how to get back. He knew it was already too late and too dangerous to keep going through the perilous forest. He began to worry that he would have no shelter for the night, when almost fortuitously, he stumbled across a broken-down cabin. It was dark, and it seemed like no one had visited in years, but he knew it was the only place where he could rest until daylight, especially since his flashlight was running out of battery. He knocked on the door a few times, but no one answered, so he let himself in where, strangely enough, a perfect bed fitted for one person awaited him in the center. He knew that if the owner came back, he could explain himself. He was sure that the owner wouldn't mind, or was even probably dead. So he went ahead and got himself comfortable in bed. As he tried to sleep, he couldn't ignore the collection of paintings around the room, portraits of strange-looking people, all peering at him, each wearing a smile that sent chills up his spine. Not too long after that, his exhaustion from the hike got the best of him, and he was able to ignore the faces. The next morning, he got up early and was shocked to see that there were no paintings around the room, only windows. A strange story was conveyed to me by a lady from Serbia. Just perfect for Halloween, I think. She says, "When I was young, about 7 or 8 years old, there was a strange beast sighted in my grandparents' village. For a few days there were rumors about a wolf-like creature lurking in the woods. Animals were slaughtered and eaten alive. But one night their worst fears were realized when an 18-year-old boy was attacked while walking home. He was scratched and hurt and was unconscious when people found him. He was unconscious for days, and when he came around, he couldn't explain what attacked him." Now, as to my own experience, we were at a cottage celebrating my oldest sister's birthday when we heard some kind of noise. We went out, a couple of us, and saw some local hunters shouting at some kind of creature that looked like a wolf but standing straight up on its back feet. This gave the creature's front legs the appearance of arms, and they were much, much longer than the back legs. They shot at it a lot of times, and I don't know what happened. But there was a strange howling coming from the surrounding forest for days after that. These events were actually reported in a few newspapers, and I still have one of the articles. I remember that the creature was called the Screamer in my village.
You shall pay, Black Prince. I curse you with my name. You shall be Blackula.
Blackula, the Black Avenger, rising from his tomb to fill the night with horror. Blackula, Dracula's soul brother, deadlier even than he. Blackula, he thirsts for your blood, he hungers for your soul, more horrifying than Dracula. The Black Avenger, Blackula, an American international release, rated PG, parental guidance suggested.
My friend Mike had a certain Uncle Johnson who always kept lots of garlic at home, and there was a cross in every corner of his house. Even his fence was made up of crosses, and there was a big cross on top of his roof, just like a church. Just across the road from his house was another very old house. Incredibly old. Its windows and doors were boarded up for so long that no living person could remember anyone living there. And no one ever rented it or sold it. Local people used to say that you could hear the screeching of a bat from inside the house. And many people also reported seeing the shadow of a tall and lanky man in the window on the upper floor, which was the only one not covered with boards. Now, despite the long time for which the house had not been used, it always used to look clean. There was not even a single leaf in the backyard. The bat seemed to love the place, and at night a number of bats used to appear there, as if from nowhere. According to the local folklore, the house was, quote, lived in by a real vampire. Many people were reported to have died inexplicably in front of the house. Their eyes used to be wide open, as if they'd seen something horrible when they died. It was also a site where accidents used to occur quite frequently. It was said that the vampire of the house opposite of Uncle Johnson's would only reveal his true face to his victims. People speculated that he was so ugly that people had a heart attack at the very instant they saw him, and this is why they died. Then when they were buried, the vampire would dig up their graves and suck their blood to feed himself. This is some crazy shit, I know, but this was the talk. The legend also insisted that anyone who accepted a dare to approach the vampire's door would get to see the creature's true face and would die a painful and horrible death. Would you like to give it a try? Oh, and by the way, happy Halloween. A man having just moved into a new apartment headed to the receptionist to get his keys. The receptionist gave him the keys with a smile but warned him not to disturb the door with no number on his floor. He wondered why, but didn't bother to ask. After all, he was too busy with his new apartment to care. After he finished unpacking, he began to get curious. He questioned why the receptionist would warn him of such things. And so he stepped out of his apartment to check the door with no number. He tried the doorknob first, but it was locked. So instead he got onto his knees and peeked through the keyhole. The apartment he was looking into was empty. His eyes scanned the whole place before stopping at a woman standing face against the wall in the corner. He noticed her pale skin and long black hair before stepping back, suddenly feeling perverted in a way for invading someone else's privacy. But he brushed it off, assuming she was someone that did not want to be disturbed. The next day he got more curious about the woman and eventually went back, straight away getting onto his knees. He peeked through the keyhole and saw all red. Red! He assumed that the pale woman must have caught him peeking the last time and covered the hole with something red. He left the door alone and instead went down to the receptionist to ask her questions. The receptionist sighed and asked, "You looked through the keyhole, didn't you?" He admitted to it, and so she felt obliged to tell him the story. She told him that a couple used to live in that apartment a long time ago, but the husband went crazy and killed his wife. However, this couple wasn't normal. They had pale skin, black hair, and red eyes. In high school, my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. I know, right? We'd done it before, and nothing remarkable ever happened. We usually did it to try to scare each other with our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night, there was no one else home except the 7 of us, and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She'd never done it before. This time it was different. The board misspelled some words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town. I mean, things at the time that we thought were bullshit. Things we neither knew nor cared about. Anyway, this spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm at the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical, and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. The board went to yes, and then spelled out K-N-O-C-K. Then the planchette stopped moving. We all just stared at it silently. And then there was a knocking on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside, but there was absolutely no one out there. And let me tell you, we never touched that goddamn board again. I had a strange experience as a kid in Mexico City one summer. You see, every summer we would visit family in Mexico, so I was very familiar with the house we were staying in. I was 8 years old, and due to lack of space, I slept in a twin bed with my mother. One night, I had a hard time falling asleep. I was feeling very scared, but I didn't know why. Nothing had happened. After my parents had fallen asleep, a weird ticking started in the room, on the side of the room where there was an open window. The ticking sound wasn't loud, and if I'd been asleep, I doubt it would have woken me up. The sound started by the window and slowly moved towards me. Since I was sleeping with my mother in a twin bed, I was facing the opposite side of the room where the sound was coming from. I was getting more and more frightened, but kept telling myself it wasn't anything to worry about, and I didn't want to move and wake my mother up. But the ticking got louder and closer, and it kind of sounded almost like footsteps, but metallic footsteps. The ticking was kind of slow, so it seemed like something was walking slowly towards me. I heard it come right up to the bed and stop, and I really felt the presence of something, and had become really terrified by that point. I knew something was behind me, and it felt sinister. Also, I could hear a low-level humming or buzzing sound, and beeping as well. I finally worked up the courage to gently turn and look, and there was something there, but it's hard as hell to describe. I saw a robot, an adult, human-sized robot. It was silver in color, and it was fucking big. It was just standing there. And here's what's crazy. It kind of reminded me of the robot in Lost in Space. That was about the only reference I had at that age. It didn't move, but I could still hear the humming, and it felt totally evil. I didn't know what to do, but at least I was in the same room with my parents, so I just ignored it. As you might guess, it took me a hell of a long time to fall asleep knowing it was still there, but I kept my back turned to it and eventually fell asleep. You know, looking back on it, I realize now that this thing, This horrifying mechanical terror had to be something not of this world.
For the first 23 years of David Kessler's life, he was only human. Then one night he took a walk on the moors.
Beware the moonlets.
Is David behaving strangely?
Are you all right now?
Well, I'll let you know the next full moon.
Tomorrow night's the full moon. You're gonna change.
From the director of Animal House, a different kind of animal, an American werewolf in London, rated R.
This is a bit of a complicated story. It goes across generations, and there are certain words that are not supposed to be used anymore, I guess. My grandmother bought a very old house that was in bad shape, but she transformed it into a beautiful and wonderful home over the years. And she owned the house for over 30 years, but it was haunted. Throughout the years, she let her children and grandchildren live there whenever they or we needed. There was one big bedroom in the back corner of the house that first was my aunt's bedroom and then my cousin's room. In between those times, it was a guest room that I often slept in. I had strange, bad experiences in that room that at the time, I wasn't sure if they were real or dreams. Now, I convinced myself that they were nightmares, but they felt very real. I dreamt about or saw a little person, specifically a little man. The man was very similar to a regular person with dwarfism, but still a little smaller, and his head was as wide as the rest of his body. He must have been about 2.5 feet tall. He would run around the room and laugh. He would run and slide under my bed, and he would also float. Now, in the jargon of that day, this thing looked like a little, evil, creepy fucking midget. He would float by the side of my bed, reach out for me, but not touch me, and laugh at me. He never said anything or did anything else, but it all felt very threatening, and of course, I was terrified. Now, like I said, in those days, we didn't call them little people. We used the term midget, but out of respect, I've learned to use the preferred term, little people. I had many other paranormal experiences as a child, but learned that no one believed me, so I stopped telling anyone about these things, and I never told anyone about this little creature until I was an adult. I was talking about that old house with my aunt who lived in that room as a child, and I asked her if she'd ever had any strange experiences, and she told me that there was a little man who would float by the side of her bed and laugh at her. And I thought to myself, holy shit. She also told me that he would act like he was going to sexually assault her, but then stop and just laugh at her. And I told her that I almost had the same experiences, and as we described him, we described the exact same entity. It was a horrifying realization that my nightmares about a little man were not nightmares like I convinced myself. It was just horrifying either way that we both experienced that frightening little man. A few years later, a younger cousin was living in that house and in the same bedroom. One night when I was visiting, it was time for her to go to bed, but she was refusing to go and crying. She said she didn't want to go to bed alone because she was afraid of the little man in the room who she thought was going to hurt her. Now, I asked her about the little man, and she told me he would run and slide under the bed and laugh, and then float beside her and pretend like he was going to grab her, but never did. She was terrified. I didn't tell her about my experiences or our aunt's experiences until many, many years later. It's interesting how sharing those experiences helped us feel better, helped us to know that he was real. We weren't crazy or making it up. That house was really, really haunted by a horrible, miserable little goddamn creature. I learned that in the traditions of Mexico and the southwestern United States, there is a creature called El Duende. They're small elf or gnome type creatures that live inside the walls of homes. And what's more horrifying, they prefer the inside walls of children's bedrooms. If you grew up in the Gullah country in South Carolina and Georgia, you've heard the tale of the Plat Eye, a grotesque creature with one large red eye and short, stubby body and long, freakish legs. Plat Eyes were shapeshifters, able to change their appearance and size as needed. One second they could be the size of a cat, the next they were as big as a bull. But they never could get it right. You could tell it was a Plat Eye because it wouldn't look right, and it would have glowing red eyes. The Plat Eye lives in the swamps and deep woods and hollows of the South. They like to hunt along dark country roads where the light barely invades. They only hunt at night, meaning you never want to be in their territory when the sun goes down. If you were, it's likely they draw you into a trap. The old folks would always say things to us as youngsters. Boy, you best not go into them woods at night, lest the Plat Eye get you. Or, boy, when the sun goes down, don't you leave that road for nothing till you get home. Plat Eye's out there. I've even heard, don't be down in that swamp no time. The sun ain't shining bright, and there's a Plat Eye out there. And I can tell you, sometimes you should listen to the old folks. See, I passed that same story along to kids as I became a parent. But youngsters today, they know everything. I tell the stories just like I'm telling you, but they fall on deaf ears. One such youngster was a little boy that I'll call Donald. They called him Donnie, and he was a bit of a know-it-all. Well, anyway, one night in October, close to Halloween, we had a festival in my town. It's called Cypress Garden Swamp. Of course, I was there spinning my yarns and enjoying a bit of good food. I told that boy, whatever you do, don't go playing in that swamp over yonder. If the gators don't get you, the Plat Eye surely will. Turns out, he didn't listen to me. Some kids dared Donnie to go down into the swamp, and he said he was the bravest, and they told him to prove it. He said he'd go, but only if he could take his friend Mikey with him. Now, most of this is what the boy Mikey told me when he came home running. But they went in a good 15 minutes and nothing happened. Then they started hearing this eerie sound, and the smell was something awful. Mikey told Donnie he thought they should head back, but Donnie didn't want to. And that's when they came across a dog the size of a donkey, he said. It had 2 tails and long tusks and glowing red eyes. Well, Mikey went to run, but Donnie insisted he was running the other direction. A few minutes later, Mikey burst out of the woods, and all we could hear was him screaming, "It's going to get him! It's going to get him!" Now, it took me a minute to calm the boy down, but when he explained what happened, I grabbed my rifle and flashlight and led a dozen men into the swamp to find the boy. It didn't take us long to figure out what direction he was in, because we could hear his screams, blood-curdling screams like he was being ripped apart. We ran through that cypress swamp as fast as we could, looking behind every stump and tree. We found him curled up on a bank, shaking back and forth. His skin was a shade darker, and his hair was almost white. He kept muttering something that didn't make any sense and staring off into the swamp. I pointed my flashlight towards where he was looking, and there was a bobtail cat with red eyes and wings staring back at me. I raised my rifle and tried to get a bead on it, but it was gone before I could pull the trigger. It disappeared into the woods like it never existed. Donnie's in a mental hospital now, and he hadn't spoken a word since that night. Some say the old Platt-Eye drove him mad with fear, and it's waiting on him to come back so it can finish him off. So, if you go into the woods at night and you hear a sound that doesn't sound right, you might best run towards the light, because the Platt-Eye could be coming for you. And if he catches you, you'll never see another sunrise.
You are about to see the most savage, carnivorous ground beast in the world. Grizzlies.
That thing seems to know what we're thinking. A grizzly is an animal, Kelly. Don't give it human qualities.
18 feet of gut-crunching terror. The deadliest jaws on land belong to Grizzly. Rated PG.
The timber wolves around Harper's Creek had gotten out of hand. There were so many wolves, the farmers couldn't stop them from killing their cattle and sheep. So the state put a bounty on them. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt he turned in. A butcher in town named Tom Wilson thought that was pretty good money, so he stopped working as a butcher and began killing wolves. He was quite a shot too. I mean, he was really good at it. Every year he killed over 500 of them. That came to more than $5,000, which was quite a bit of money in those days. After 4 or 5 years, Tom had killed so many wolves there were hardly any left in that area. So he retired, and he vowed never to harm another wolf because wolves had made him rich. Then one day a farmer reported that a large black wolf had killed 2 of his sheep. He shot at it and even hit it, but the bullets didn't have any effect. Soon that wolf was seen all over the countryside, killing and running, sometimes, to the witness's horror, on 2 legs. That's when the talk of werewolves began, and this creature couldn't be stopped. One night, the creature even came onto Tom's property and killed one of his cows. You better believe that when that happened, Tom forgot about his decision to never harm another wolf. He went into town the next morning and bought a young lamb for bait. He took it into the hills and tied it to a tree. Then he backed off about 50 yards and sat down under another tree. With his gun in his lap, he waited. When Tom didn't come back, his friends started to look for him. And finally they found the lamb. It was still tied to a tree, hungry, but still alive. Then they found Tom. He was still sitting against the other tree, but he was dead. His throat had been torn open. But there was no sign of a struggle. His gun hadn't even been fired, and there were no tracks in the soil around him. As for the werewolf, it was never seen again in that region. But of course, this all happened more than 100 years ago. So my advice to you is to take special care on nights of the full moon. She snapped awake out of a deep sleep, screaming aloud in terror. In her nightmare, a large white wolf had been chasing her around and around the house, gaining on her with every step until it finally pounced on her and ripped out her throat. She lay shaking for hours, unable to sleep after such a terrifying dream. But morning finally arrived, and the day was completely normal. Celia forgot all about her dream until the moment her parents reminded her that they would be going out that night to celebrate their anniversary. Celia turned milk white. In her dream, the white wolf had come to kill her while her parents were out celebrating their anniversary. She started shaking and begging them not to go. Her parents were astonished at her behavior and finally shamed her into staying home alone that night. Fearfully, Celia locked herself into the house as soon as her parents left, checking every door and every window. She tried to laugh it off as she got into bed, and finally she shook off her irrational fear and fell asleep. Celia snapped awake suddenly, every muscle tense. She heard the tinkling of falling glass from a broken window and the snuffling sound of a snout pressed to the floor. It was the sound of a hunting wolf. A werewolf. Real wolves did not break into houses when there was plenty of game outside. She could hear the click-clacking of the creature's claws on the wooden floor. The musky, foul smell of wet animal fur combined with the meaty breath of the carnivore drifted into the room. She could hear the werewolves panting right outside her bedroom. Then her body was out of bed and she sped through the bathroom and down the back stairs. She heard a soft growl and then the sound of animal feet pursuing her as she raced down the steps and tore open the back door. A glance at the window beside her showed a reflection of the werewolf leaping down the last few steps behind her. Celia's feet screamed in protest as she ran painfully across the sharp gravel driveway toward the tool shed with its shovels and baseball bats. Anything she could use as a weapon. But the huge red-eyed wolf was suddenly between her and the tool shed, stalking toward her. The cold wind pierced her skin as she turned and fled around the side of the house. She gasped as the white wolf howled and took off after her. She could hear the terrifying sound of the creature's pounding feet. Faster, faster, she commanded her legs, panting desperately against the fear choking her. She would run around the house and back down the driveway, she thought, with the clarity of sheer horror. She felt the wolf snap at her back leg and felt the sting of teeth. She put on speed. The wolf veered away from her suddenly, and she felt a rush of hope. She couldn't hear the wolf now, couldn't see it in the cloud-darkened night. She kept running around the house, heading back toward the tool shed. To her intense relief, she heard the sound of a car coming down the road in front of her house. Her parents were back and would save her from the wolf. Then her heart stopped in panic as she turned the last corner and saw the shape of the white wolf as it stood balanced on the porch, railing right in front of her. It sprang upon Celia, huge teeth tearing into her flesh and ripping out her throat. She fell under the weight of its body, hot blood spilling all over the ground, and died seconds after she hit the ground. 1 minute later, her parents' car pulled into the driveway, its headlights blinding the white wolf as it pulled toward the house. Frightened, the wolf backed away from its kill and then ran away. The creature was never seen again.
Horror of Dracula. Dracula, the most terrifying lover the world has ever known.
Who will be his bride tonight?
Horror of Dracula.
Dracula, dead and yet alive for 600 years.
Dracula, the human vampire who lusts for human blood. See Horror of Dracula. The greatest shock story of them all now achieves new heights of motion picture suspense.
See Horror of Dracula and watch the fiend who rises each night from his coffin bed to seek the rendezvous that alone can keep him alive.
See Horror of Dracula and watch those who came to destroy a monster stay to become his victim.
See Horror of Dracula.
But don't dare see it alone.
The chill of the tomb won't leave your blood for hours.
Horror of Dracula.
All new and in flaming Technicolor.
I live on a small farm far out in the country. Every year, my dad puts out scarecrows in our fields because he thinks they're effective in not only keeping the crows out, but evil spirits as well. I guess he's a little superstitious. The scarecrows he sets out are the same ones year after year. And after so much wear and tear, they were showing their age. This October started out just like any other October. The weather was turning cool, and the leaves were beginning to change into brilliant orange and yellow colors. One Saturday, us kids got together and decided to make a new scarecrow. Being creative, we gathered our supplies and got to work. This scarecrow was to be different. This was my special design. I wanted a creepy scarecrow, much scarier than the others. Hours later, we finished up. Indeed, he was the ugliest, most frightening scarecrow I'd ever seen. And I was so proud. Mom called us for supper, so we planted the scarecrow out in the cornfield, where I could see it from my bedroom window. Not giving it any more thought, we went in and ate. And soon the wind picked up, and it began lightning. No storm was forecasted, but it looked like we were in for a rough night. Light rain began falling as I went up to bed. I was worried about my new scarecrow, so I peeked out of my window. What I saw shocked the shit out of me. He was there all right, but not where we'd placed him. It appeared to me that he was several feet to the right. Puzzled, I stood at the window and watched intently. The lightning was bright, and every time it flashed, I could see my scarecrow. The problem was, it looked as if he was moving when the sky was dark, only to turn up in another spot when the sky lit up. Thinking that I must be imagining things, I put my pajamas on and went to bed. Later on, a loud crack of thunder woke me up. By now, the rain was pounding down, making it difficult to see out my window. I slipped on my shoes and snuck outside to check on my scarecrow. Not sure where he was, I walked around in the thunderstorm, half blinded by the cold, stinging rain. Clumsily, I stumbled over a fallen branch and fell face down into a damn patch of mud. When I looked up, there was my scarecrow glaring down at me. His eyes were huge and glowing red. I couldn't pick myself up fast enough. I ran screaming to the house and never looked back. After tossing and turning the rest of the night, I woke up to a bright sunshine and the smell of bacon. Not wanting to tell my parents what happened, I sat quietly and ate breakfast. Anxious and apprehensive, I then went outside to look around. My dad was already looking for storm damage to the buildings, but I was looking for my scarecrow. I have to admit, out of confusion, I began crying, not because of losing the scarecrow, but because of pure, unadulterated fear. My father told me that he probably blew away and would be discovered in a field during harvest. But I knew better. Somehow, some way, that scarecrow came alive. And how, I don't know. Well, of course, this was years and years ago. A lot of time has passed. And to this day, I've never seen that scarecrow. What the hell happened that stormy night? Do scarecrows really keep out evil spirits? Or can they be possessed by one? I don't live on that farm anymore. But I've never ventured outside during a thunderstorm again.